This class is specifically about endgames. And I always, whenever I think about an endgame, I remember a comment from a dear friend of mine. His name was Michael Frenette, and he was many times the champion of Washington State. And as I was growing up, I was like 12, 13, 14, Mike would win the closed Washington State championship, and he was considered the strongest player in the state. So I would go up to Mike and I would ask him, I said, like, you know, what do I have to do to get better? And he said, study your end games. It's like cheating on an exam. I was like, okay, explain that one to me, Mike. He says, well, the idea is if you're going to play chess and you're going to play a lot of chess games, you're going to get to the ending. So you might as well study the end game in anticipation of the exam that you're inevitably going to have. And I go, yeah, it's really hard to study the end games. He says, well, don't study all of the end games, just study rook endings. You go, really? He says, yeah, because in the exam, that's the place where you're going to get asked the most questions. You're going to play more rook endings than virtually any other endings. And indeed, and as my career unfolded, I played lots of endings, but many of them featured rook endings. So I'm going to show you two rook endings today, and it's an absolute certainty as you become more experienced, as you play more chess games, more tournament games, you're going to get into a rook ending of rook and 4 versus rook on 3 on the same side of the board. It's just going to happen. And I chose these two rook endings from my career that I thought would be very good for tonight's class. I played a match with Vassily Ivanchuk in Tilburg. It's a city in Holland. Not even sure what year it was. 92? There you go. 1992. It's a two-game match. And in case you played 1-1, then you would play two classical chess tiebreakers of 30 minutes per side. So in the first game, I was black, so I'm going to do them out of order. The game was a draw, and I got rook and 4 versus rook and 3, and I couldn't win it. In the second game, I was white. I got rook and 4 versus rook and 3, and I couldn't win it. And as we started our tie breaks, before we started our tie break, I said, Vassily, if we get a rook ending where I had rook and 4 and you have rook and 3, I'm going to claim 3-time repetition and a draw to the match. Unfortunately, I didn't get my 4 versus 3, and he has won the match in tie breaks. But as opposed to going to the game position that I want to go to, we'll just briefly look at how we got there. Okay, I did a lot of things in the opening as white. I played Englishes, readies, queen pawns. I pretty much stayed away from E4, except in the beginning of my career. I loved E4, but it just got too much theory. And preparing for Ivanchuk is a nightmare. You know, you just have no idea what the guy's going to do. And the next thing I know, we were in a Catalan. Yeah, I had my built a fortress, knight E5. As was seen in many of the games between Viktor Korchnoi and Anatoly Karpov from the 1978 World Championship match, Anatoly was defending this gambit, knight c6. And this was very, very popular at the time. And as it still remains popular today, black offers his pawn on c6. I took and played e3. So what my idea is in a nice, wonderful world, I will play moves like, I don't know, queen a4, knight d2, knight takes, bring my knight here to e5, and I'll have a wonderful position. bishop a6. And so I'm well, we have this very strange position where I've messed up Vasily's pawn structure, but he has very good play for his pieces, and my bishop on c1 is not very good. Knight d5, and we got to this position. I played b3. So I have to do something to get my pieces, my queenside pieces developed. And we got a position like this. So I've been a little bit better some of the game, and we're in a Rook and 4 versus Rook and 3. So how many of you have had Rook and 4 versus the Rook and 3? Pretty good, pretty good. Okay. If White has a chance of winning this position, his best setup is to have his king on g2 and his pawn on g4. Once you have your king on g2 and your pawn on g4, you have a lot of opportunities to press with g5, king g4, and h5, or h5, h6, keeping black's king under pressure. And almost an ideal formation would be to have h6, g5, f4, e3, 4 versus 3, because then your pawns on h6 and g5 are setting up all kinds of checkmating patterns. So the kingside pawn structure is actually quite critical. And one of the shocking things that I learned from Victor Korchnoi is that when you're playing Rook and 4 versus Rook and 3, what is the ideal pawn structure for the defender? What is the defender's ideal pawn structure? In this case, the ideal pawn structure for black is f7, f6, king g7, pawn on h6. Remarkably enough, the doubled f pawns really stop all of White's breaks. So you've heard me just talking about putting your pawns on g4, h5, h6, g5, bringing the king up. Obviously, black's pawns are not doubled, but if the pawns were doubled, you can see it's very hard to play g4, g5 without at least allowing one pawn to trade, and it's very hard to play e4, e5 also without allowing at least one pawn to be traded. The goal of the defender is to trade as many pawns as possible. So in this position, one of the critical defensive moves for black is this one. Other than having the doubled f pawns, this is absolutely black's best defensive formation. And we could start to think about it another way. How are you going to win this game with white? If you play e4, e5, e6, well, black will just take it, and then it'll be 3 versus 2. You have pawns on g6 and h5. Easy defense. Does it make any sense to prepare and play f4, f5? Well, yes, it does. You could play f4, f5. If the guy takes it, he may have a weakness over here, but if black puts his king on g6, he'll defend both the weaknesses. And so f4, f5 doesn't really do it. Does it make any sense to play f4, put your king on f3, play e4, put your pawn on f5? Well, once again, not really. Black is just simply going to take it, put his pawn on f6, and make a very easy draw. So it's a very, very hard against this structure for white to do anything concrete. Practically the only thing he can do is play for g4 takes and play for h5 takes. Get 2 versus 1, stick your pawn on f6, put your pawn on e5, and somehow checkmate black. Nice idea, very, very hard to accomplish. So we played lots of moves, but I was really, really impressed by how Ivanchuk defended this ending. In the first place, he put his rook on the second rank, keeping me a little bit anchored, so to speak, to my f2 pawn. It's very hard to get an active king. You can't really go king here when you're losing your f2 pawn with check. So we've made some moves. I didn't see anything else. I can't, in this moment, I can't really break with g3, g4, because again, my e pawn is, my f2 pawn is a problem. So I did the next best thing that I could. I got his rook off the second rank, put my king on f4. Notice how very immediately, from Black's defensive point of view, Black really has two ranks that he likes his rook on. He definitely likes his rook on the second rank, and he definitely likes his rook on the fifth rank. On the fifth rank, it cuts off my king ever wandering up into Black's defensive area. e4. And look how Vassily just waits. He puts his king on g7. He just waits. Finally, kind of frustrated and don't have too many ideas of how I can continue, I play f3. So now I'm frustrated with before I was frustrated when his rook was on the second rank. Now I'm frustrated when the rook is on the fifth rank, and I'm hoping to get in some kind of, I'm a pawn up. I want to do something with that pawn. I want to push it up the board and try to create a passer. Rook. So we're just having some moves, and finally g4. Yes?
Sorry, why doesn't Black put his rook on the third rank instead of on the fourth? Sorry, the one rook only? Yeah, so here he moves his rook to the fourth rank and not to the third rank.
Yes, that's a very good question. I'm not sure myself. I think, first of all, I would have put the rook on the third rank. Yeah? And I think that that would have forced me to somehow bring my rook back to e3. I suspect at this point, Vassily was entertaining a very strange and dubious idea of playing f5. In the case that Black plays f5, I'm really happy, because at a certain moment when I move my king, he's going to play fe, and I'll play fe, and I'll have a passed pawn. So I think that this was just a fake-out misstep, if you will. So we just get to this position. I've done the best I can. I've achieved the maximum I'm able. I can't move my e-pawn forward, so I play g4. Takes, takes. And great, I get an h5. So now we have rook and 2 versus rook and 1. And again, it's going to take a lot of cooperation by my opponent, unfortunately. I would love to get my rook to the 6th rank, drive my opponent's king back, play f4 and f5, f4 and e5. But even that is going to be a draw. And he stopped me right away by putting his pawn on f6. So he's waiting. So again, from the rook and 4 versus rook and 3, I've achieved the maximum I can, and yet it's still not enough. And we made a draw. Okay, so let's go to the second, the second game, which was actually the first game. So in the first game of the match, I was Black. And let's see it from the good guy's side. Okay, actually this is a really funny game. And I still remember it. It was really great. Vassily Ivanchuk is very interesting face. His eyebrows are very thick, and they actually seem to come all the way across, kind of in a Groucho Marx kind of style. And when he's at the board thinking, he's very expressive with his eyebrows. Sometimes you're like, and surprise, and the eyebrows will bounce up and down. I sacrificed a rook, and when I made the rook sacrifice, a move that he didn't see, the eyebrows started fluttering. This was a very funny game. I liked, in those days, I played lots of defenses myself, but I was always pretty true to the Nimzo-Indian defense. And I liked a particular variation, this variation called the Rubinstein variation, the Nimzo. White is usually playing for bishop d3, knight f3, castles, and so on. And I like to play what was called the Hübner system with c5. For those of you who remember the 1972 match between Bobby Fischer and Boris Spassky, Bobby Fischer won, yes, check, with black. I like black's formation. Black is intent on playing e5, and sometimes this pawn on c4 can be a target. And I've done quite well on the black side of this system. My results were not lost on Ivanchuk, and he plays this move knight ge2, which makes a lot of sense, right? If black is constantly threatening to capture the knight and double the pawn, why not defend the knight and play a2, a3? I really like this line that Anatoly Karpov played against Viktor Korchnoi in the Baguio City match in 1978. Karpov on the black side has played this position. So the move I played, and it's a really cool move, and I liked it very, very much, was this position. I played knight e4, he played bishop d2, I traded my knight for his bishop, okay? So I get rid of my opponent's bishop. I lose time doing it, but now I played the move a5, and after a3 takes, bishop d7, and my idea is to play a4, locking my opponent's queen side, or rather shutting my opponent's queen side down. So where my opponent has an advantage, that is to say my opponent has a queen side majority, my intent with my pawn on a4 is to play b6 and to keep my very strong center pawns on e6 and d5. Castles, knight c6, rook e1. Now why? Yes, of course. So he played this move with the intention of knight takes d5. I took his pawn, he took my pawn, bishop c6, knight b6, attacking my rook. My king's in the center, and it's very, very, very complicated, very tricky position. I had a cool move. What move did I play? I played rook a5. Ooh. And this is where the eyebrows started going up and down. It was like, ooh, he didn't see that one. That was a big surprise. And my idea, of course, is simply to take this pawn, and then the knight's undermined. So, in this position, Ivanchuk realized suddenly, oops, this is like Wile E. Coyote, running after the roadrunner, and he goes off the cliff. And then he keeps running and he wakes up to the fact there's nothing underneath him. And now Wile E. Coyote's got to put on the brakes, and white has to desperately make a draw from this position to try to save the game. I was very, very impressed by Ivanchuk in this game because he's suddenly in a state of shock. If he takes the rook, do we understand what would happen if he takes the rook?
Knight check.
Yeah, just a second. This is the new variation, right, at the top? Yep. Indeed. Knight check, and if he takes? Queen G5 check, and King H1, and mate. And what about King H1? Same thing? What's the same thing? Queen. I think I was going to go Queen H4. Yeah. And then H3. And then I was going to take the rook. And if he takes my knight, and I take H3. And if in this position he goes check, ooh, I got to move up, and he takes a rook. The double, take my rooks, baby. It is still mate. After all the pyrotechnics, it's still checkmate. Right-o. So, now, again, he's got to reestablish his bearings and try to figure out how to hold the position. He came up with the best move. He played Rook D1. I took a pawn. So now I'm really happy. I'm a pawn up. Bishop E4. Getting rid of my good minor pieces. I took castles. He played this so well. You can see we're about to get to Rook and 4 versus Rook and 3. Now, remember in the previous Rook and 4 versus Rook and 3, pawn was here and pawn was here. It was like the H4, H5. In this particular case, yes, I've gotten in the much more very, very important G5 versus the first endgame. Rook over. Nonetheless, I've got Rook and 4 versus Rook and 3, and now I've got to figure out what's my ideal setup. Like, I can put my pawn on H5, E5, F5. You know, how would you go about winning this? What would you think white's best winning strategy might be? What do you think? What's the best setup for, what's the best I could do? Yeah? Well, my idea was that the best I could do is maybe go H5, put my rook on the 4th rank, go H4, put my pawn on H3, and on a very good day, go check and go over and eat his H-pawn. It doesn't really ever make sense to go like E5, F5, E4, F4, and E3. That pawn just doesn't go anywhere. White's king is ideally placed to stop the march of the E-pawn. Play G4, H5. Okay, so again, in my fantasy, I'm hoping that one day I'll be able to put my pawn on F5 and I'll be able to play H4, H3. Yeah? That would be cool. Hate that. H3. Now, the problem for me is that if in this position I play the move f5. What do you think? Is that a good move? Is f5 a good move? The problem is he takes, and he simply waits. Let's say he waits by putting his rook here and his king on g2. How on earth can I make progress? If I push my pawn to e4, e5, pardon me, check, here, he comes back. I can't play f4, e5 is hanging. And I'm stuck. Yes?
So bringing your own rook over to protect the...
Sorry, putting my rook where?
So after d5,
Pardon me? Yeah?
d5, white takes the rook to attack. And then now protect your own pawn with your own.
Yes, exactly. Rook, king, rook, and let's say wait.
It's no good to push the c.
Yes, well I can, and then takes, I have to take with the king, and now I have these split pawns, which means it's very, very hard to make any further progress, sort of like black has a very easy time defending. If I go down with ideas like like this, he comes back behind me and gives a check, and my king can't find sanctuary. He will just keep checking me and going after this pawn on g4. So, back here, I thought that one of my better options was to take this pawn and force his rook into this awkward situation. I thought this was my best chance, was that somehow to take advantage. If I could put my pawn on e4, I'll put his rook here, and I'll put my pawn on f5, and maybe I'll trap his rook. A little bit artificial, I know. He had this move, rook e3. Why didn't I do what I wanted? I think the problem with the immediate e4, let me just show you the variation that I was trying to achieve, was something like this, where I might be able to artificially isolate my opponent's rook. Unfortunately, this idea also doesn't work. White could play king g2, I move my rook, and he could play f3, and he breaks out. So I have played king here, and I've gotten this situation. Now my dream is that I'll be able to play f4, king g4, f3 check. Now that would be winning. If I could get in the moves f4, king g4, and f3 check, I would win the game. He checked me. I thought that this was very impressive defensive work. It turns out that the doubled f pawns, nothing. Whenever my king tries to go to e3, he checks me here. Whenever my king tries to go to g3, he checks me here. Whenever my rook moves off the second rank, he plays king f2. So let me go back and show this a little bit slowly. From the defensive point of view, this is a really, really important point to remember, is that the doubled f pawns are a draw. Like if we just magically take this h pawn off the board, it would still be a draw.
Is that only true if that f pawn is on the third rank?
Yes, yes. It's very important that this pawn is here. It's far too advanced. If the pawn were back, then I'd have tricks of like king g3 and king f3 and so forth. But now with the pawn so far advanced, we got this. I was trying to make some moves, trying to trick him. Now I'm hopeful, please, if there is a God, I go king f3. Yes, sir.
Remind me, if I got a pawn on f3 and you remove the pawn on f5,
Yes.
is that a draw? In that
Dead draw. Rook behind.
The pawn is too far.
Yeah, yeah. And the
Okay, so
king.
I'm back on the fourth rank. I should be able to build a bridge.
Right, trying. But without this pawn, there's no sanctuary from checks from behind. So here it was my last desperado. I'm trying to get in some kind of a king up the board and trick him. This maneuver, you're familiar with Philidor's maneuver, that you just keep your rook on the third until this other pawn moves all the way up the board, and then you come right back down. It's like this pawn isn't even important. The extra pawn really doesn't help my cause. So I tried to trick him, offering a trade of rooks, but this king and pawn endgame, unfortunately, is a very easy draw. And rather than stalemate my opponent, which is sometimes kind of cool, we made a draw here. These rook and pawn endgame positions of rook and 4 versus rook and 3 are really, really the meat and potatoes, I want to say, of top chess masters. It's almost a given that the top grandmasters will score maximum. They'll make a draw when they're the defender. They'll somehow figure out how to win it when they have the extra pawn. I remember Magnus Carlsen winning a rook and 4 versus rook and 3 against Karyakin, Sergei Karyakin. But that was quite different. White had a weak pawn that Magnus could go after. Any questions about this ending? This was again, just to repeat myself, that I thought that because the pawn wasn't on h4, I have a little bit more opportunities. And it's quite possible that already I have blown it remarkably, or blown it is a strong word, but helped my opponent, I'll put it like that, by advancing this pawn too soon. It might have been much, I might have been able to put a little bit more pressure on Vassily had I advanced my king with the idea of h5, h4. From what we learned, what do you think, how do you think black should, how do you think white should defend this position? If you had white in this position, what would be your approach? F4, I would like that to play against that move because I would be able to attack, suddenly be able to attack this pawn on f4. Rook A7, I would like, because let me say rook here. Okay, so go ahead and make a suggestion. King G2, H4. Go ahead and make a suggestion. Now again, it's very, very likely you're going to get a rook and 4 versus rook and 3 in the near future. I'm not a truthsayer, but okay, what's a good move for white now? Just waiting, perhaps? Rook c7. Let's say we just wait. Let's say h4. Well, now after h3, I've created a little bit more of an imbalance. Here, probably your very best move is to take with the king. If you take with the pawn, you're giving me a passed pawn. From the start, the reason I didn't play king g6, pardon me, was because of, remember that in the earlier example how Vassily had put his rook on the fourth. I was worried that if he plays rook here, that his very next turn will be to play h4. So, for example, let's say I play h5, he plays h4, I advance my pawn, he plays for argument's sake rook here, I advance my pawn, he plays for argument's sake rook here. Now it's very hard for me to go running in with my king. He's going to put his king on g2 and stop me. And when I get my king to say d4, he's going to come around and he's going to go after my h-pawn. So I'm going to be anchored to my h-pawn in a short while. Any questions? It's all good? It's all good?
With perfect play, is Rook and 4 versus Rook and 3, is that normally a draw?
Yes, yes, absolutely, absolutely. The difference is, let me just do something. These two Rook and 4 versus Rook and 3 endings have to deal with the fact that they're together, right? This Rook and 4 versus this Rook and 3. If you take this d-pawn and move it over a file, d5 or d6, it doesn't matter, the extra pawn becomes a pass pawn. And in that case, the chances of winning rise. Now, we all know, let's say, put the pawn on b5, we all understand the defender's rook needs to be behind the passed pawn, right? You take this pawn and put the pawn over here. You take this rook, put it over here. Black moves his b pawn. His king comes like a beeline over to the b file. You eat f7, you eat h7. He makes a queen. You give up your rook, and then it's a race back over there to the king side, right? Any rook ending where you have a pass pawn, your chances of winning a pawn ahead go up quite a bit. These positions where your benefit of a pass pawn should, with best play, always be drawn. But, on the other hand, you should be able to put pressure on your opponent. Vassily made it look easy. Yeah. And you also had a question, sir.
Yeah, so moving the pawn up on the h5, trying to get in with the king.
So,
Well, yeah, here, so black will move.
yes,
King up.
king up, let's say, very good.
Yeah.
And rook out back.
And now again the king up. To the h5.
King here.
Yes.
All right, and h4. So I don't really want to take because that kind of splits my pawn. I lose some structural integrity. Let me play a move like h6 here, king g2. And now I'm stuck. I don't know how to further my advantage. Pardon me?
Yeah, I was thinking of when something like this happens to move the c pawn.
Okay.
F-pawn, sorry.
Yeah. So f pawn. Now I'm just not 100% sure. Let's say I take, check. Now, if I don't take the pawn, he's going to trade. So let's say I take, he comes over. I got to practice my highlight skills, so I'm attacking the pawn, and let's say rook here, king up. Kind of feel like, darn it, I'm hitting the wall again. My extra pawn. By the way, this mechanism, this drawing mechanism, as well as that F3 drawing mechanism, that's very, very common in these rook endings, that the defender has a way of totally ruining the attacker's pawn structure, doubling up the pawns and stuff. Back here, again, I have played this move because I was very fearful of rook here and h4. And again, I think I should have played, oops, sorry, not that one. Sorry, yeah. I think here, in this moment, I might have tried, I don't think it would matter. I think that, in fact, it's simply a draw. But, you know, only with the benefit of hindsight. I think I should have tried a variation. Let me say, I want to get my, yeah. I should have tried this move to stop my opponent from playing rook a4 and h4, and then to try to have pressed from here. Let's say king g2, just as a move, h5. And I think his best move is actually to play h3 and to meet h4 with g4, okay? So this is basically the best I can achieve over on this side of the board. And now I really don't have anything better than, for example, here, he's waiting, and I can achieve more or less as a maximum something like this. Then in this position, he steps backwards. He controls this rank so that I have nothing better than rook here, rook here, rook here, hoping to be able to step up with my king. Then I think he should give me a check and go after one of the, oops. See, you see why I need to practice my skills? I can do this. Just a second, overwrite this and this. So essentially, this is perhaps one of the best outcomes I can achieve. Yeah, is to get a position like this. He'll step back. So essentially, he's waiting. At some moment, I'm going to have to play f5. And as soon as I do play f5, he'll probably give me a check, and we'll get a 3 versus 2 position. One other very important point about the defender's rook, it's an interesting thing. Why did I choose a3 and not, for example, b3? Arguably, in this position, it probably doesn't make any difference, but it's a very, very good principle of getting your rook as far away from the king. You want to check from far away instead of from up close. Yeah, when you check up close, the king might crawl towards the rook and you run out of checks. When the rook is really far away, it's very hard after check, king back, check, to walk towards the rook, because then my king gets completely off to the wrong flank. Good. Well, thank you all for coming. As a special treat, I might say, just take a look in the database, the game between Seirawan, that's me, and Jonathan Spillman from London, Phillips and Drew. There, I won a Rook Three versus Rook Two, but it was very, very different than this. All right, thank you all for coming. Have a good evening.